So if unemployment numbers are coming down, then why are the number of Americans on food stamps going up? More than 47 million Americans now receiving the benefit. Is it because government officials are constantly promoting it? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Victoria Barrett, Rich Karlgaard, Morgan Brennan, Rick Unger, John Tamny, and Bill Baldwin. So, John, why are food stamps going up if unemployment's going down?
Well, the unemployment rate is still abnormally high, and I think we also know that that unemployment rate obscures a lot of people who've left the workforce altogether, who are no longer counted. As for politicians encouraging that, that's a really horrifying notion. The idea of going on food stamps is something that we should always try to avoid. It's something that should be so painful that we only go on them for a brief time so that there's an incentive to get back into the workforce. That politicians are doing the reverse is something that we've got to look at more seriously.
Well, Rick Unger, you have all these ads on radio and television. I listen to a radio program. I hear about 4 of them every hour. You have government volunteers now specifically going out to encourage people to get food stamps. There is a big push to get people on food stamps.
Yeah, I would take some exception to that. I don't think this is about promoting food stamps. This is about getting the information out there to people who need food stamps so they know that they're there to get them. One other point to John's point. I think there's a lag taking place here that we need to recognize. Unemployment is coming down. We had some surprisingly good news this week on that factor. There will be a lag between that coming down and people being able to make the switch off of food stamps and get back to work.
But, Victoria, simple fact, there are now 15 million more people on food stamps than there were 4 years ago.
Absolutely. And the scary thing to me is that this has been building over the last decade. So we can talk about this as a phenomenon of the recession. But when you look at both President Bush and President Obama, we've seen a really unprecedented rise in the food stamp program to the point where this program is so large that it's also supporting a large bureaucracy that wants to fuel its growth.
Yeah.
It's $4 billion in administrative costs. Those people don't want to lose their jobs either. So I don't see this going away until we have a real frank discussion about it nationally.
And Morgan, Victoria brings up a great point. There is a sort of industry, a bureaucracy that is being created around all these poverty programs, not just food stamps, by the way. If you were to add up all the poverty programs, we're excluding Social Security here, add them all up, it comes out to $22,000 for every poor person in America, 47 million poor people in America. Why not just get rid of the bureaucracy and cut them a check?
I think that's a great idea. We could have an entire debate on that. But let's just go back to food stamps for a second and this idea of government promoting food stamps. Right. We have a farm bill that's actually kicking around Congress this week that proposes $4 billion in cuts to the food stamp program over the next decade. And the Agricultural Committee chairwoman has actually said she'd be open to even larger cuts. So whatever you want to say about food stamps, our government is taking measures to try and scale it back.
But Rich, look, I'm kind of a simple guy here. I see all this advertising by the government to put people on food stamps. I see 15 million more people on food stamps after that government program and during the government program. Isn't there a relationship there?
There is, and Victoria properly describes something you could call the welfare industrial complex, and once it gets to a certain size, it begins to look over its on behalf of itself, and that's a bad thing. But look, we really have another crisis here that's related, and that is we have a growth crisis. We're growing at about 2%. We should be growing at 4% annually. If we were, and we had the right tax and regulatory policies to liberate job creators to do that, I don't think we would have this food stamp crisis.
I think actually all of us could agree on that. But what about this welfare industrial complex bill that Rich and Victoria are talking about? That's kind of scary, keeping poor people poor because they're pushing all these welfare programs on them.
David, I don't think you should be shocked that self-perpetuating bureaucracies engage in advertising and promotion to justify to their constituencies whatever they're doing.
Hold on a second. It is shocking. It is shocking that government officials would want to keep people poor so they can push these programs on.
But let me give you an example, and this goes back a few years, and this is a real narrow-casting example, but the New York City subway system used to have posters written in Spanish advertising a gay, lesbian, domestic violence, Hispanic hotline. You know, that's how fine-grained it gets in New York City. New York City, on the subways, pushes welfare programs at people. Yes, it informs them, but it also pushes it at them.
But John Tamny, let's get back to the poverty programs here and what they are pushing, which is food stamps and a lot of other welfare programs that I think very often have a tendency to keep poor people poor. Once you're on the dole, it's a lot harder to get off it.
It certainly is. The incentives are wrong, and they're trying to encourage people to stay on it. But I do believe and agree with Rich that this is ultimately a growth crisis. Economic growth is easy, and if we get the policies right, a lot of these people will go off it. I also agree with Victoria here that we have also a welfare industrial complex, and that you have a lot of well-paid bureaucrats that have an incentive in order to keep these people on food stamps. Yeah. We've got to talk about that, too.
Rick, a lot of Democrats have talked about the danger of welfare creating a sense of dependency, from FDR to Bill Clinton to Senator Moynihan. I mean, this is not just something Republicans and conservatives are talking about.
No, that's right. And I think that's an absolutely valid conversation to be having. The only thing that I'm always trying to point out, don't confuse two things. If you want to reform welfare to resolve the problems that you're raising, and they're valuable problems, they are. You're correct in raising them. We should be incentivizing people. But let's not mix that up by condemning people who actually need some help right now, because times have been bad. People need to feed their families. Let's not resent that.
But Victoria, are we advocating policies that keep poor people poor?
I think we are. And Rick, to your point about families, the Obama stimulus plan made it easier for childless, jobless people to get on the food stamp program. We should be revisiting that now at this point, because the scary fact is looking at a 30-year period, the only two presidents that have reduced the participation rate of the food stamp program is Clinton, bless his heart, and Reagan. Every other president has watched as this program has gotten larger and larger.
And Rich, when you look at what this particular administration has done, you see a lot of policies to sort of dismantle the attempt to get back to workfare that we saw during the Clinton administration, right?
Yeah, but Victoria's point about Reagan and Clinton, of course, we had economic growth then because government wasn't eating up everything. We had the incentives were better aligned for business people to create jobs. I believe in the old parable that it's better to teach a man how to fish than to give him fish. If he's starving, give him fish. But the long-term answer is to better prepare people for the needs of the 21st century economy. And these broken communities and broken families and broken schools are not doing that.
All right. And I don't think these government ads are doing it either. Gang, thank you very much. Coming up next, taking a hit.